topic of nuclear war in the 19th century is of interest to many people. It does not give rest to the officials, but presents new interesting hypotheses to researchers who study the history of our real past. Today we will talk about the topic of nuclear war in the 19th century. Try to understand what kind of catastrophe occurred just a couple hundred years ago, was it, and what consequences it left to this day. Yes, traces of the catastrophe is manifested everywhere, in traces of former architecture, in paintings and writings, and what is the most important in the change of landscapes and reliefs of our country. What to say? Inconsistencies with the official history we can meet all over the world. Let's not go far, let's not look for something, but just look around. Look at our neighborhood, our nature, forests, lakes. Probably many people have encountered amazing places even close to home, because many people are familiar with the phrase, if you want to hide something, put it in the most visible place. And it's true. Let's just look at our country. On the maps, I have very interesting findings for you at attentive studying of maps, well as simply viewing familiar to me terrain. I have found out an unusual lake. Look, Lake Nikolevsko, Omsk region. The settlement is in a wood zone between Omsk and Petropavlovsk. But wait, look at these lakes around. They after all practically identical. The same even circle. Strange where they could come from. But you know what has struck me most of all? This surprise simply cannot be transferred by words. You should see it yourself, just a little bit down the map. Look at this. What is it? It's a small piece of terrain just littered with lakes, like funnels. And you know what else is striking? Half of these lakes are not even mapped. Look, using the map scheme, we see only a small part, but if you change the mode to satellite mode, we see an even more stunning picture. That surprisingly these lakes do not even have names, as if they are not lakes at all, but some pits filled with water. The diameter of these strange lakes varies from half a kilometer to a kilometer. What is remarkable, next to these funnels filled with water, there is one more, in principle a large and independent lake, also has an interesting oval shape. Having set an interesting hypothesis, I began to look at the maps around, and what do I want to tell you? There are countless such oval lakes, and not only in Russia. But now let us dwell on our lands, to be more precise. Paying attention to the Yamal Peninsula, well, it seems to be an ordinary peninsula in the north of western Siberia, but, again, all attention to the map. When you look at it in detail, you cannot believe your eyes. What is it? Friends, just write in the comments, what is this striking picture? What you see is just kind of mind-boggling. Why? Why is the whole peninsula like a sieve, distorted by some sinkholes or pits? And now pay attention to the modern nuclear test site. Maybe it will somehow explain to us what we have seen. Compare this with pictures of a nuclear test site in the state of Nevada. These are almost identical craters, but again, these craters were created by modern nuclear weapons. But how can they be similar to the craters in the Omsk region, or in Yamal? Yamal would be even cooler. What you can notice is that these craters are empty. There is no water in them at all. What is very curious, let's read the name of the state again. The state of Nevada. The very name tells us, no water. But let's go back to the territory of Russia. Do you think only Yamal is so painted with funnels? And now let's look at Kazakhstan, which is in the opposite direction, right on the border with Russia. Let's look at the salt lakes. Some of the lakes are oval, but some are almost perfectly round. And again, the lakes don't have any names. Well, curiously enough, here are the salt lakes. Nearby we can notice Bitter Lake. As a rule, only locals give names to such lakes, and sometimes these names are frankly frightening. For example, Dead Lake, Devil's Lake. But these names have quite logical explanations. Fish in them simply do not live, and people are scared to swim in them. For example, here is what local residents from the Kostroma region write. We also have a huge number of such lakes. Surprisingly, they are very deep, and the water in them alkaline, closing them without powder laundered. These unexplained phenomena are just scattered all over the country. Look at this. Sakhalin, Lipak. Sometimes there are single lakes, but they are unusually round in shape. And what an interesting name. Holy Funnel and Lomonosov district of St. Petersburg. The name is also striking. Lake Black. Scientists tell us that such lakes are the consequence of the formation of karst failures, that is, just collapse of the ground and the formation of sinkholes. But maybe it's just glossing over the real events of the past. Well, so that unnecessary questions do not arise. We explain the reason for these formations. What other questions can there be? Wait a minute. What about the radioactive background on these lakes? What about the melted soil? How can this be explained by the failure of the soil? We don't care about that anymore. Let radiobiologists, petrographers, and soil scientists deal with that. Let's just look at a nuclear sinkhole and compare. For example, the classic crater after the explosion at the Semipalatinsk test site in 1966 of a 20 kiloton charge with a depth of 100 meters has a diameter of about 600 meters. But what can we say about the diameters of these craters? They sometimes reach up to a kilometer, and there are cases and much more. But okay, let's say that the craters are indeed traces of some kind of bombardment or catastrophe. But how do you explain the presence of water in them? I'll try to add my observations on this. When you zoom in on the maps, you can see a slight change in the landscape. We can assume that this area was in water. Of course, very curious, where could so much water come from? Was it all flooded by the sea, or was it the endless rains? For example, Yamal is washed by the Kara Sea, and the presence of water is understandable, but what about the central part of Russia? Strange. As always, there are more questions than answers. Indeed, the round lakes exist not only in Russia, but all over the world, and almost everywhere the fame of them is shrouded in mystery and mysticism. Sometimes locals living near these lakes find strange stones that have strange shapes, as if they were melted by something. Of course, sometimes you can trust the written texts, but I'm used to checking everything myself. For example, I went to one of these lakes. Look what interesting artifact I found just walking nearby. What else is striking is that traces of an unknown catastrophe are found not only in Eurasia, but even in Africa. In general, many questions arise. Why is everything there in the sand? Where did all the soil go? How natural is it possible to form such a desert? But the Sahara and its sands, it is striking with its unique pictures of the discovery, and the topic for a separate video. If you want to familiarize yourself with its ambiguous history, please inform about it in the comments. And now back to Africa and the traces of an unknown global catastrophe. For example, if we superimpose old maps of Africa on modern satellite maps, we can notice a huge difference. For example, where centuries ago there was a boiling life and large cities. Now on modern maps everything is covered with sand. But when we study in detail, we can see distinct craters. But how could they be formed right in the middle of the desert? How did they appear? Why on the sites of missing cities? Usually the catastrophe of the 19th century is attributed to nuclear war and nuclear weapons. But what if we assume that there could have been an environment comparable to nuclear weapons, and maybe even more advanced? Perhaps there could be used ether technologies, explosive ether technologies comparable to nuclear ones, which simply disappeared today. Or were they simply hidden? Because sometimes considering the most unusual hypotheses, we can find the necessary forest fragments, which in the future can be assembled in the whole picture of the real past. And now, let's look at another miracle unexplained by official historians. The Eye of the Sahara. It is a concentric structure with a diameter of 50 km, located in Mauritania among the sands of the Sahara. It's been baffling scientists for years. There's simply no logical explanation for this phenomenon. It was only discovered in 1965, and since then, historians have puzzled over the cause of this giant geologic formation. What's also striking about this phenomenon is that depending on the time of day, the desert changes color. Indeed. There is so much unrecognized in our world, even sometimes looking at the things around us, we cannot understand the reason for their occurrence. In general, with the theme of the catastrophe of the 19th century, many interesting inconsistencies with the official history. Interesting questions rise and about the age of trees. Why trees in our area are not more than 200 years old. Maybe trees just do not grow and have reached their maximum size. But no, let's just look at these photos. Did such huge trees really exist and not as long ago as we think? But then why were they exterminated? Was it to hide the real truth about our past? The subject of the catastrophe of the 19th century is indeed very vast and holds many mysteries.